Welcome
yes.
to the Isle of Man.
Thank you so much. It's the first time I'm here, and I'm delighted to be here.
And thank goodness you made it.
Yeah, it's true. It's it's part of life, part of the job. But
because your flight was originally cancelled, wasn't it?
Yes, all sorts of things happen, but it's good I'm here, and I always like to be a little bit ahead of schedule coming to concerts, just because you don't want the organisers be worried whether you're coming on the day. I think it's a bit unreasonable, so I always plan a couple of days in advance. Yeah.
And that clip that we heard, I believe, was Rachmaninoff, wasn't it? And you're a great fan of Rachmaninoff.
Yes, I am. Well, that was indeed actually a live recording from the third round of the Tchaikovsky competition, which I won at the age of 16, and that opened for me the doors onto really world's best stages, and it was quite an experience. And also what you get after it at quite a young age, it really proves sort of whether you are able to do it or not, because you're young and you're still studying, and suddenly these sort of concerts and appearances. But I'm enjoying it. It's lovely, and Rachmaninoff is, of course, one of my favorite composers, really. However, I love many, and I can't really choose. It's almost like pick your children and choose whom you love more. It's almost impossible to answer that question. Yeah.
And you mentioned having started at such a young age. We talked about you playing with symphony orchestras from the age of 7. Do you remember the very first time your hands actually landed on the keys of a piano and what that felt like?
Oh, well, I don't quite remember that, but I remember very well the way I was actually choosing the instrument, because my mom is a pianist. She's a professor at the conservatoire in my hometown, and she wanted me to play an instrument, and the choice was really violin or the piano. And I looked at the violin, and for some reason I thought it must be extremely painful to squeeze all those strings, and I was actually quite terrified that my poor little fingers, they will get hurt by pressing these strings. So I said, is it really painful? As painful as it looks. And I got for some reason an answer that yes, it's not easy, you have to press hard. And I remember it was terrifying, and I said, yeah, I do piano instead. It seems okay. And so I got into piano, and actually neither of my parents wanted me to become a professional. My mom just wanted it, as music, all-round education is good for your brain and things like that. But I was really a natural there in a way. I didn't have to do much to do well at the very young age. And this actually is a bit of an obstacle now, because I still think I can do everything very easily, but with years, I think you have to do a lot more than when you're a child. So, yeah.
But it must have been, to have played with that symphony orchestra at the age of 7, you must have had some fairly rigorous practice sessions. You must have sort of really been sat at the piano for a large portion of your youth.
To be very honest, I don't remember, at least till the age of 9, practicing more than sort of 2 hours a day. That's the reason. I don't know. You see, UK and Russia are very different in terms of the way they bring up their children. I'm sure the Isle of Man is probably closer to the UK in that way, where in Russia people take everything very seriously, whether it's sports or music. And yeah, there's the idea that if you have chosen something, you need to actually do it properly, rather than sort of, do it just for fun. So I guess, but it was also nice to do it, and it was almost a motivation to practice for, because it's an orchestra and you're a tiny little girl, and it was a great experience, actually. I wish many more children have been actually given that opportunity, because then they might develop something they like to aspire to at the early age. Yeah.
And I should just say super quickly, I know you've got Anna Goldsmith sitting beside you there, and Anna, you play piano as well, don't you? But can you imagine getting to this sort of level?
Yeah, not quite the same level as Yulia, but the practicing, certainly that was... my parents always said, it's down to you. We pay for your lessons, it's down to you to practice. And it was more for the singing for me, and I would practice to an hour to 2 every day. And you have to commit if you're going to learn an instrument and want to play it in front of people on a classical level. You have to put the hours in.
And sorry, excuse me, I'll just clear my throat. Yulia, you went on to study under a number of prolific musicians at various prestigious music schools, including the Royal College of Music and University of Arts in Berlin. I'm curious about how those places shaped your playing, because performance of music is very much down to interpretation, and it's so personal and subjective. How do you deal with the varying opinions of these different experts and identify what advice would strengthen your craft, and from that which might weaken it? It must be a very very extreme experience to be exposed to all these different people.
It's actually a great question, because music is indeed very subjective. It's such a subjective art, and in a way you have to take all the competitions with a pinch of salt, because ultimately it's a group of people that is judging you. And I had successful competitions and very unsuccessful competitions, and there were many failures, but you just have to understand that those are the people who judge you, and they might not always have the same opinions. And in fact, what happens quite often that people disagree, and they disagree with your interpretations. And I had a very interesting example before playing Haydn Variations, which is a very classical piece, and I had my professor at the Royal College of Music, who was Alexeyev, a Russian pianist, quite well known, won Leeds competition in the UK, and so I took that piece to him, and we worked on that for a couple of lessons. And then later on I had master classes with Sir Anders Schiff, exactly on the same piece, and Prokofiev and Cornell, and that was a completely different interpretation we've discussed there, and he actually didn't like my interpretation or the way I brought the pieces to him, finding it almost too romantic. So yes, you sort of have to, I think the most important thing, you have to sort of stand up by what you do and, say why you're doing it and what are the reasons. Because ultimately, if you have been through vigorous training and you've done the hours and you understand the style and you have the technique, people would like your interpretation. That's what actually people go for, because that's the reason there's so many artists. And, you listen to Horowitz and you listen to Rubinstein of the same piece, and you love the way that it's different. So I think the most important thing, actually, when you're already out of the education, is to try and find your way and stop in a way following. I mean, in a way you should follow and have some sort of things you need to work on, but have your opinion and stand by it. And that's when music really comes alive, because it comes through your personality.
Yeah.
So you think, you talk about that, and you talk about sort of each musician having their own sort of interpretation and putting their personality on a piece, which fascinates me, because I would have thought playing something as complicated as the piece we've just heard, that just getting through it would be the achievement, to be honest. But for the people that you admire,
yes,
who are fellow musicians, can you tell? So if you had two different musicians playing that concerto number 2, would you know who it was that was playing?
Most likely. And I think it's actually, it has decreased with years, and in this age people started to sort of, the interpretations is more similar than, let's say, if you take the golden age, what I consider at least the golden age, with, let's say, Hoffmann, Horowitz, Rubinstein, Arau, Serkin, because at that time people were really different in their interpretations. So you could definitely say, or in Russia was Richter and Gillies and Sofornitsky, so you could, they sort of almost had the instruments as their really way of talking to you. I'm less confident, I think, with the nowadays artists to definitely say, oh, this is this artist, but pretty much with Horowitz, Richter and others I mentioned, I can tell who is playing. It's actually quite remarkable.
Is that because communication at that time wasn't like it is now? So one of these pianists would interpret it, but another person wouldn't know how that person had interpreted it differently. Nobody felt bound to interpret it in a certain way.
I agree. And I think also when you learn a piece now, the most obvious thing is to go on YouTube or the Spotify and listen to the way it's played. but that's, it's inevitable that then you get some ideas from it that might not be really yours because you've just got them from someone else, and so it becomes a bit similar. I guess, yeah, you just, it's always there are positive sides and negative sides of our age, but indeed the communication is a is a thing now.
Oh, so I'm going to jump in super quick because I know we're rattling on. This is fascinating. I should just say, though, you're going to have a much longer conversation, aren't you, with Julia?
Yeah, we're going to be speaking to Yulia on Spotlight this week. Yulia and Monty Don. So they'll be our guests this week on Spotlight, which you'll be able to catch, and we'll have a lot more time to go into a lot more detail.
Which is excellent. But speaking of this evening, you can actually see Yulia performing tonight. Leonard, give us the information about tonight's concert.
Tonight's concert at Ramsey Grammar School, West Building, as normal, at 7:30. And it's open, pay at the door, £12 to come in, and students, children, free, get a cup of tea as well. But people come to the Music Society, and I've spoken to people afterwards, and they've said, "This is the first time I come. I cannot believe I've heard such standard in Ramsey." And so I said to people, come along to this concert. I'm sure that if you come along to this concert and realise the standard that we're presenting, you'll come a lot more often.
I think you're absolutely right. And I'm intrigued to know, Yulia, what made you agree to come to the Isle of Man? Because you're used to playing enormous venues all over the world.
I love smaller venues. And I must say, it actually reminds me of how this all have started in the first place. Because if you think about, Schubert or Beethoven or Mozart times, there weren't any really public performances where you have 2,000 people in and, the light goes down and there's the spotlight on the piano. It's all terrifying. But it started rather with a sort of group of friends and, playing for each other. And really the first concerts were Schubertiads, where people just happened to play Schubert's music. And it's actually only Franz Liszt who started the normal recital that we are aware of, because he was such a virtuoso freak, and that's how the recital really appeared. And people even had different players, not only just one, and things. But just talking a little bit about tonight's performance, it's a very interesting program, all Russian program, with some Prokofiev and Rachmaninoff and Tchaikovsky, with some very popular pieces like Rachmaninoff's Second Sonata, wonderful piece, and some sort of lesser known pieces with Prokofiev, Last Sonata Number 9. And I must say, these programs, this year's programs up to June, they are part of the UK-Russia official music year cooperation, and I was very careful to choose this all-Russian program for up to June, and then from June we're going to Moscow and presenting all British program there with my duo partner Jonathan Deakin, and later on there's a big festival in London. So it's all sort of thought through and is themed. So if people would like to know a little bit more about Russia and the time where pieces were written, come tonight, and I really hope you enjoy it. Yeah,
you heard it first in Ramsey.
Exactly. The Isle of Man is part of this remarkable thing. And just super quickly as well, you met Prokofiev's grandson, didn't you?
Yes, and not only he actually one grandson, the whole family. Well, it used to be 5 grandchildren in London, unfortunately 4 because one died last year. But they're lovely people, lovely family, very supportive. I've just done a big Prokofiev Festival, the South Bank and Pushkin House, with lots of young people coming, and it's really terrific response also from media, from BBC and other medias in the UK. Really, it was a joy to do. It was a lot of work because I've curated the project, and with the Prokofiev family behind it, it's just extremely daunting to make it as a success, and I'm really grateful for their support. But it went well, and I'm hoping this will be a second Prokofiev Festival next year.
Amazing. Yulia, it's an absolute joy speaking with you this afternoon.
Likewise.
And for those of you that are listening, if you have any questions for her, she will be with us till the end of the show, or any questions for Leonard, of course, 166 177, or you can email studio@manxradio.com.